spectacular series of miracles, all of which defy any explanation except that found in the biblical account. The story of the Exodus conjures up visions of ancient Egypt in all its glory. But to understand the Exodus and who the children of Israel were and why the events of the Exodus occurred, we must begin much earlier and much further north. After the flood, mankind was reborn through the family of Noah. As his family grew, once again knowledge of the true God was forsaken by the majority. Although given the command to go forth and replenish the face of the earth, a large group traveled from the east to a plain in Shinar where they built a city called Babel and began to build a tower that was supposed to reach to the heavens and save them in the event of another flood. But this contradicted God's purpose, and he soon confounded their languages, making it impossible for them to remain as one people. About 425 years after the flood, God called a man named Abram to leave his country, friends, and family and go to a land called Canaan. Because of his faithfulness to the true God while the world around him fast fell to idolatry, the Lord made Abram a promise. I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Abram lived in Ur of the Chaldees. There were several ancient cities by the name of Ur, but the phrase Ur of the Chaldees makes it clear which city was Abram's home. The Urartuans worshipped a group of gods whom they called the Chaldees. Near Lake Van, several inscriptions have been found, one of which mentions 63 gods followed by 16 goddesses. One inscription states, "This is the spoil of the cities which I obtained for the people of Chaldees in 1 year." Ur today is called Urfa, and was in the plain of Shinar, where the great apostasy of Noah's family had fully bloomed into profound paganism. Abram's family had remained near Babel when the other groups had left the region. When he received the command to leave for Canaan, Abram gathered his family and left Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. Ancient Haran, where they stopped and stayed until Abram's father died, still bears its ancient name and is located just 19 miles down the Balak River from ancient Ur. Further evidence of Abram, later called Abraham, in this region is the presence of the names of other members of his family, all still preserved within a radius of about 25 miles. His great-grandfather, Serug's, name is preserved in the town of Suruk, about 22 miles west of Haran. And between Haran and Urfa is Tel Terahi, which means the ruin of Terah, who was Abraham's father. And of course, Haran was the name of Abram's brother, who was the father of Lot. Slowly at first, in Canaan, Abraham's family grew. His son Isaac bore 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. It was Jacob who would inherit the position of patriarch at Isaac's death, and it was his sons and grandsons who would one day formally become the nation called Israel. Among the 12 sons of Jacob, one was especially favored by him, Joseph. And unwisely Jacob showed his favor by bestowing upon the boy a special coat of many colors, which caused great jealousy among the other sons. Their jealousy was made even greater by the dreams that Joseph had and shared with his family, dreams which indicated that he would one day occupy a position of great authority and that the others would bow down unto him. One day when his older brothers were tending the flocks in Shechem, Jacob sent Joseph to see if all was well with them. When Joseph approached them from afar, the brothers' jealousy caused them to plot Joseph's death. Only his brother Reuben saved the 17-year-old's life by insisting that they not kill him, but instead cast him into a pit. Stripping him of his special coat, they did so, and when a company of Ishmaelites taking spices and balm to Egypt approached, they decided to sell their brother as a common slave to these men for 20 pieces of silver. But in spite of the horrendous betrayal and ordeal this young man suffered, Joseph remained faithful to the God of his fathers and became a shining light in a land of darkness. He accepted his life in this foreign land among a heathen nation and became a trusted servant to a high-ranking official of the Pharaoh. Then Joseph was falsely accused of a terrible crime and was imprisoned. When all hope must have appeared lost, he was summoned to interpret the Pharaoh's dreams. The interpretation of those dreams by Joseph had warned of an impending 7-year famine, which was to follow a 7-year period of plenty. Deeply impressed by the young man, Pharaoh asked Joseph's advice on what to do to avert a great nationwide calamity, and because of the wisdom displayed in his reply, the Pharaoh appointed him to collect the grain and prepare for the famine. So grateful was the Pharaoh to Joseph and his God that he appointed Joseph to a position second only to the Pharaoh. "Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou." And it was through the obedience of Joseph that a special haven for the descendants of Abraham was provided. During the famine, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt to get grain. There, Joseph recognized his brothers, whom he had long ago forgiven. After he had tested them, he revealed his identity to the shocked and fearful sons of Jacob. When they realized Joseph intended no harm to them in spite of their grievous deed, they obeyed Joseph's command that they bring their father and entire family to Egypt. During the famine, Joseph had bought all the land of Egypt for the Pharaoh except for land grants made to the various priests, and allowed the people to live on the land and return 1/5 of their increase to the king. When Jacob's family arrived, the Pharaoh honored Joseph by bestowing upon them the right to live in the best of the land of Egypt, the land of Goshen, which was the beautiful and fertile Nile Delta. It is also called the land of Ramses, or Ra, the Creator, the sun god. And it was here that God's chosen people would grow and thrive, from the 70 souls who came with Jacob until they became a great multitude. Though many have claimed there is no evidence of the story of Joseph in ancient Egypt, on an island just below the first cataract of the Nile, an ancient inscription written around the 4th century B.C. was found, which claimed to be a copy of a document written by Pharaoh Djoser more than 1,000 years earlier. It is the story of a land grant made by the Pharaoh to the priests of the god Num. It tells of 7 years of famine and 7 years of plenty, how Pharaoh had a dream and consulted his chancellor for help. It contains most elements of the 7 years of famine and 7 years of plenty story, although they were corrupted in this account written over 1,000 years after the event took place. But most importantly, the priests who wrote this inscription were relying upon the land grants made by this Pharaoh to justify their claim to some land. They were not writing what they believed was an ancient myth. They obviously believed the land grants made by Pharaoh Djoser to still be valid and of enough authority to still be in effect well over 1,000 years later. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh. Ancient Egyptian records list Djoser as the 16th Pharaoh of Egypt, and historians have classified him with the so-called Third Dynasty. His chancellor, named Imhotep, was first known through the writings of the Egyptian historian Manetho, who in the 3rd century B.C. wrote, "During Djoser's reign there lived a man named Imhotep, who had the reputation of the Greek god of medicine and who invented the art of building with hewn stone. The legends attributed to Imhotep were so incredible that he was considered to be mythical until this century, when excavations at Djoser's pyramid complex revealed the base of a statue with the name Djoser on it and the name Imhotep, with his long list of titles, one of which was Chief under the King, a title which first appears with Imhotep and also was first bestowed upon Joseph. Imhotep was also the architect of Pharaoh Djoser's pyramid and surrounding complex, a veritable city within a city of incredible beauty and extremely advanced in design. Built on the plateau of Saqqara, adjacent to ancient Memphis, the pyramid within the complex is the first ever built in Egypt. Ron Wyatt spent a great deal of time here searching for evidence which might shed light on the biblical account. Such an event as the famine described in the story of Joseph and the distribution of grain to the other countries would have required a major facility and system of organization. When the famine came and Joseph's brothers came from Canaan to get grain from Egypt, we are told that they went to Joseph, which indicates that he personally oversaw the distribution, at least to those coming from foreign countries. And this would mean that there was certainly a central location or granary to which the foreigners came. The complex at Saqqara contains 11 massive pits, which even the Egyptians are at a loss to explain. They are not tombs, for all tombs were underground and carefully sealed, while these were accessible from the surface, and they are extremely large. But most fascinating is the fact that they are all connected by chutes. Ron believes these were the grain storage pits of the 7-year famine. As grain was removed from one pit, grain from the other pits flowed through the chutes, making the grain always accessible from one location. These are within the wall of the step pyramid complex, which has only one entrance, and it opens to a long covered passageway with small cubicles on each side, each just the right size for a person to sit with perhaps a small table. The narrow, singular entrance would have allowed only a few people to enter at a time. There was no doubt in Ron's mind that this was the main center of grain distribution on a massive scale. When they arrived to get their grain, the people lined up to enter the long corridor. Once inside, they paid one of the cashiers in one of the cubicles for the amount of grain they wished to purchase. After payment was made, perhaps they were given a sack for grain, which reflected the amount of their payment. Then they proceeded through the corridor, straight to the area of the grain bins. Once there, they descended the stairway next to the storage bins, handed their sack to a worker who filled it and returned it to them. Then they exited through a small door on the lower level, which led to the outside of the complex. When the pits were first excavated, Bits of grain still remained in them, but the official explanation was that it was the remains of food placed in graves for the deceased. However, as we mentioned, these bear no resemblance to any ancient Egyptian tombs, but they do bear a marked resemblance to pits identified as grain storage bins in other ancient civilizations. During the 7-year famine, Egypt gained great wealth and prominence among the nations through the selling of the grain. The Egyptians who lived in their cities along the Nile had little to do during the famine, since they had a 7-year supply of grain to rely on and were able to devote their time to the building projects of the Pharaoh, not as slaves, but as grateful subjects. The family of Jacob, who lived in the delta, separate from the native population, prospered and grew, exempt from the 1/5 taxation levied on the native population. From the time Jacob's family came to Egypt until the birth of Moses was about 180 years. Many pharaohs had come and gone, many ruling contemporaneously with others in different regions, but until now all recognized the rights granted to the people of Israel to live in the land of Ramses. But that was about to change. Exodus 1:8. There arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. Israel had remained a separate race from the Egyptians, and had grown and prospered to such an extent that they were viewed as a potential enemy nation right in the midst of Egypt. But the Pharaoh didn't want to banish the Israelites because they were skilled craftsmen, adding great wealth to the nation. By oppressing them with the bondage of hard labor, he sought to subdue them and crush their spirit. When this failed, the king then sought to decrease their number by issuing a decree that every Hebrew male born alive was to be cast into the river and drowned. It was at this time that Moses was born, and hid by his mother in an ark of bulrushes, placed in the river, and rescued by the Pharaoh's own daughter. Raised as the Pharaoh's grandson, he was considered part of the royal family, but his loyalties remained with his own people. When Moses killed an Egyptian for smiting a fellow Hebrew, he incurred the wrath of his adopted grandfather, the Pharaoh, and he fled Egypt to Midian. There he married the daughter of Jethro, the priest of Midian, a worshipper of the true Creator. 40 years later, he was called of God at the burning bush to lead his now enslaved people out of Egypt. The rest of the story is well known, but the apparent lack of any evidence has led scholars to either doubt the truth of the entire story, to try to downplay the events and explain them in terms of natural science, or explain them as normal events which were blown out of proportion. Ron Wyatt believed they occurred exactly as the Bible stated. After the final plague, which took the lives of the firstborn throughout all of Egypt, Pharaoh called Moses and said, "Rise up, and get you forth from among the people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as you have said, and take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also." With sandaled feet and staff in hand, the people of Israel had stood hushed, awed, yet expectant, awaiting the royal mandate that they should bid them go forth. Before the morning broke, they were on their way. The Israelites had been scattered throughout the empire of Egypt by this time. As slaves, they were bound to go wherever they were told to work for the Pharaoh. But during the plagues, they had all slowly returned to Goshen or Ramses. Exodus 12:37. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. They journeyed from the land of Ramses or Goshen and encamped or gathered at Succoth. When the people were given the feast of unleavened bread, God told them, "For in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever." This scripture clearly told Ron that they left Egypt that very day, and that Succoth was outside of Egypt proper. Many Egyptologists and scholars agree that the ancient Egyptian frontier fortress, called Tharu or Thaku, was ancient Sukkoth of the Exodus account, as it corresponds linguistically with the Hebrew word. Thaku was the last Egyptian city on the northeastern border, and was where the ancient pharaohs organized their armies as they prepared to go to war to the north and east. It was the only place large enough for several million people with their flocks and herds to be gathered together. And the journey of such a massive group would have been impossible without order, and Ron believed that it was at Sukkoth or Thaku that they were organized for travel. Here their journey began, but where were they going? Moses had asked to take the people 3 days' journey out of the land of Egypt to worship the true God. But by the command of God, Moses knew they would not return. He had been in Midian when he had seen the burning bush and had been called by the Lord to deliver his people out of bondage. And though he had been told he would lead them to the promised land, they were first to come to Mount Sinai, for God had told him, Exodus 3:12, "This shall be a token unto thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain." Many scholars agreed that Midian was in the northwest sector of present-day Saudi Arabia, but they somehow missed the fact that Mount Sinai was also in Midian. So, from Sukkoth, they set out from Midian and Mount Sinai. But the direct route, which would take them directly east, since they had to go around the eastern finger of the Red Sea, was too dangerous. Exodus 13:17, "And it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, Lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt." The Philistines lived along the coasts. Ancient records show peaceful relations between the Philistines and Egypt at this time, but had they encountered the Israelites, they would have regarded them as escaping slaves and captured them to return them to Egypt. Therefore, God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. Throughout known history, the desolate peninsula located between the two fingers of the Red Sea has remained uninhabited except for small, isolated groups of Bedouin. The ancient Egyptians operated mines there, but the conditions for life were so terrible that one official left a stele behind telling of his experiences there. Quote, "The highlands are hot in the summer, and the mountains brand the skin." And this desolate and forbidding region, nestled between the two fingers of the northern end of the Red Sea, was quite reasonably called in the biblical account the wilderness of the Red Sea. Instead of taking the people across the flat northern plain, Moses led them through the more mountainous region where they were protected by the mountains. At the end of 3 days, when the Israelites continued their journey, instead of returning in the direction of Egypt, spies and lookouts flashed signals across the mountains. Exodus 14:5, "And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled." When they arrived at Etham, in the edge of the wilderness, they had almost reached the northern tip of the arm of the Red Sea called the Gulf of Aqaba. But it was here that God had another plan for his people. "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon. Before it shall ye encamp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, They are entangled in the land, the wilderness hath shut them in." Had they continued their present course, they would have soon reached safety. But instead they turned south and entered into a massive group of mountains that were without escape. The winding 18-mile-long canyon, today called Wadi Watir, twisted towards the seashore, at times less than 100 feet wide. It constantly looked like a dead end up ahead, But as they continued their journey, the mountains would seem to open up as they approached. Pharaoh knew the area and felt confident when he stated, "They are entangled in the land, the wilderness hath shut them in." Once they entered the Wadi Watir, there was no way out until they reached the sea. God had foretold how long their flight from the Egyptians would be when he gave them the feast of the unleavened bread, or bread of haste, which lasted 7 days. From Sukkoth to the beach at the Red Sea is about 140 miles. Could they have traveled this far in such a short time? Exodus 13:21. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud, to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire, to give them light, to go by day and night. Traveling both day and night, they would have had only to average about 1 mile per hour, or 24 miles a day, to reach the sea in 6 days. Once they arrived at the sea, they encamped, but in great fear, for here they certainly felt trapped. Stories of the ordeal must have been passed down through many generations, for 1,500 years later, the Jewish historian Josephus wrote, quote, "For there was a ridge of mountains that terminated at the sea, which were impassable by reason of their roughness in their flight." The enormous beach at present-day Nueva is certainly large enough to have held several million people in their flocks. And to the south, the mountains extend to the sea, making further travel impossible. When Ron first explored this beach in 1978, he saw the mountains of which Josephus wrote that blocked further travel to the south. To the north he found the very ancient remains of an old Egyptian fortress, most likely built as an outpost for troops assigned to protect the Egyptian mine workers in the region from attacks from the north. The old structure remained in use for many, many years, as it had been repaired many times. Ron believes this was Pi-Hahiroth. Many people believe that the parting of the Red Sea could only have occurred at a place where it is relatively shallow. Perhaps that is why most people believe it took place at the Gulf of Suez, which is quite shallow compared to the Gulf of Aqaba, which in some places is 5,000 feet deep. It is also about 8 miles across from the beach at Nueva. The few bathymetric maps Ron was able to find showed that the depths from the Nueva beach to the opposite shore reached a maximum of about 900 feet, gently sloping, while on each side there were sheer drops to about 5,000 feet. There certainly appeared to be an underwater path which could have been traveled with the water removed. When Ron and the boys first came to Nueva, they went to the south end of the beach. There Ron found a Phoenician-style column lying in the sand near the water's edge. Examining it, he saw that there were no inscriptions still legible. Water erosion had damaged it beyond any repair. At that time, the Sinai was being occupied by the Israelis, and they were in the process of using dynamite to level part of the mountains that reached the Gulf in order to drive their tanks along the coast. Ron pointed out the fallen column to an army officer, and the next time he returned, he found they had moved it back from the beach and set it in concrete. He would later learn the significance of that lone column. He and the boys then donned their scuba gear and began to investigate what may lie beneath the waters of the crystal-clear Gulf. The biblical account told of Pharaoh's army being drowned when the parted waters rushed together, and Exodus 14:24 further tells that the Lord, quote, took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily. On the first dive, Ron found chariot wheels preserved by the coral which had attached to it. He found an axle with portions of each wheel still present, one lying flat and the other extending several feet above the ground. These chariot wheels were very difficult to see and recognize because they are covered in coral, and the portions that were not covered have disintegrated. Most wheels he found had 6 spokes. However, he found several 8-spoked wheels. He removed this one and took it to Nassif Hassan, who was then head of antiquities in Cairo. With no hesitation, he told Ron it was from the 18th dynasty. Thinking his answer a bit quick and perhaps too casual, Ron inquired how he could make such an identification upon first sight. Mr. Hassan explained that the ancient Egyptians only used the 8-spoked wheel at one time in all their history, during the 18th dynasty. In February of 1988, he found this gold 4-spoked chariot wheel in the same general area. There is no coral on the main part of the wheel, because coral doesn't attach to gold, only around the hub area where some wood was exposed when it came off the chariot. While the style of this wheel is similar to that found on the walls of ancient Egyptian tombs depicting chariot making, it also bears a resemblance to ancient Assyrian chariot wheels, which also provides a very important evidence. The abundant evidence shows that there was only one period in ancient Egyptian history when 4, 6, and 8-spoked chariot wheels were used. In his article, Observations on the Evolving Chariot Wheel in the 18th Dynasty, James K. Hoffmeyer in 1976 explains that it was only at the beginning of the 18th Dynasty that the chariot comes into use in the Egyptian army. He also relates how it was only during the 18th Dynasty that the 4, 6, and 8-spoked wheels were used, and that monuments can actually be dated by the number of spokes in the wheel. Exodus 14:6. And he made ready his chariot, and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. The Pharaoh took with him every chariot in Egypt, his own, his captains who headed the divisions, and a group called his chosen chariots, which seemed to be in addition to his regular army. There is an inscription of Ramses Meriamun that tells that he had an army of 20,000 troops, which was divided into 4 divisions. This implies that each division consisted of 5,000 troops. But many times the Pharaoh took more than just soldiers into battle. The priesthood and the military were closely associated. The Egyptian government was a combination church and state, so to speak. There were many, many gods in ancient Egypt, but the ultimate god was the one represented as the sun and known throughout the various times as Amun, Aten, and Ra or Re, among other names. It was this ultimate god that the Pharaoh was considered the earthly embodiment of. The divisions of the army were named after the gods. For example, the first army, that of Amun, the army of Ra, the army of Ta, and the army of Sutek. When the army set out to war, elaborate ceremonies were performed at the temples, asking the various gods to give them victory over their foes. Then, booty that was gained as a result of victories was dedicated to the priesthood and temples of the deities. All military victories were directly attributed to the favor of the gods. Many times, if an upcoming battle was considered to be particularly important or difficult, the priests of the various gods would accompany the army to the battlefield in hopes that the god or gods would show special favor in their endeavors. When the Pharaoh set out after the children of Israel, he had seen the power of the true God, the great I Am, during the terrible plagues. If the Egyptian army ever needed supernatural intervention by the hands of their so-called gods, it was at this time. Since the gold-veneered chariot wheel Ron found was on the Egyptian side of the gulf, this indicates that it was at the rear of the army. A priest who is not trained in battle would most certainly be in this position at the rear.
Okay, we're out here at the beach that the Israelites came out on when they came out of the canyon system that they had been following by the leading of the cloud, and of course following Moses, who was following the cloud. And they came out on this beach and proceeded to the south, which is this direction. there was an old Egyptian fortress up to the left, Piharoth, and so they turned southward, and of course the cloud turned southward, and that was what they were following.
Soon after entering this area, the Israelites set up camp beside the sea, whose waters presented a seemingly impassable barrier before them, while on the south a rugged mountain obstructed further progress. With all areas of escape blocked, the Israelites felt they were doomed. Suddenly they beheld in the distance the flashing armor and moving chariots, betokening the advance guard of a great army. As the force drew nearer, the hosts of Egypt were seen in full pursuit. Terror filled the hearts of Israel. Some cried unto the Lord, but far the greater part hastened to Moses with their complaints. Because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. It was not an easy thing to hold the host of Israel in waiting before the Lord. Lacking discipline and self-control, they became violent and unreasonable. They expected speedily to fall into the hands of their oppressors, and their wailings and lamentations were loud and deep. The wonderful pillar of cloud had been followed as the signal of God to go forward. But now they questioned among themselves if it might not foreshadow some great calamity, for had it not led them on the wrong side of the mountain into an impassable way? Thus the angel of God appeared to their deluded minds as the harbinger of disaster. But now, as the Egyptian host approached them, expecting to make them an easy prey, the cloudy column rose majestically into the heavens, passed over the Israelites, and descended between them and the armies of Egypt. A wall of darkness interposed between the pursued and their pursuers. The Egyptians could no longer discern the camp of the Hebrews, and they were forced to halt. But as the darkness of night deepened, the wall of cloud became a great light to the Hebrews, flooding the entire encampment with the radiance of day. Then hope returned to the hearts of Israel, and Moses lifted up his voice unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Moses, Wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel, that they go forward. But lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go on dry land through the midst of the sea.
From the Red Sea, the great multitude